All right, this one should be better. Let's see here. Testing the stream, testing audio. All right, that's much better. All right, welcome everybody. Let me make sure everybody has this one. Let's go here. We moved. There we go. All right. Let's see, that's that. Wait, where's that? This one. Wait a second. Wait a second. Which one is which? All right, this is the one everybody's got. All right, yeah, okay, we're good. All right, I'll just do it. I got a new microphone, so hopefully it's better. Sounds a little bit better, a little cleaner. Still working on it, but we will get this going. All right, and I have it open here, so if there's any questions in the chat, go ahead and just leave them here, and then, oh, cool, much better, great. I do need a haircut though. All right, so let's do the Storyform Builder. So let me come into here and share screen. It should be this guy. All right, just come back here. That should pop up. Wonderful. All right, so today what I'm going to talk about is the all new, brand new Storyform Builder. So what is that? So that is something that was in the original Dramatica application about 30 years ago, and is generally the thing that everybody loves to have, because they can very deterministically choose the exact story form they want to do. Prior to our merger this year, I never really wanted to copy the exact same thing because I didn't think ethically that's such a great thing to do in terms of just copying the same Dramatica application and then just putting a different name on it. Um, and then the other thing is I feel that there is a fair amount of confirmation bias that slips in when people use what was called the story engine, in that they will make choices based on what they see rather than what they feel inside and what they're trying to communicate with their story. So when I built Subtext, I had a different version of the Storyform Builder here, where it was really trying to get you to the idea of what a story form is, and to really connect with the meaning of the story form. So that's why you would have the narrative argument here. You would come down here, make all these changes, and then through the magic of AI, you could see, all right, well, this is what this story form means. This is still going to come into the platform in the subtext module. But until then, and because we are merging together and we're all friends, not friends before, um, I just went ahead and fast tracked this. And I think it's really, really amazing. So all you would do is you just come into the platform here and then you just click on Storyform Builder. And, there's some design things I would have to work on, but functionally it works great. Right now I'm zoomed out as far as I possibly can, and I'm sure it looks horrid on mobile, which I will fix as well. But for those of you who used Dramatica in the past, you know exactly what this is: the story engine settings feature from the original Dramatica application, with some cool new changes and some cool things that I'm really excited about that I got in there. So what you'll know is when it comes to Dramatica theory, all these different narrative aspects here are all part of the story form, and they're all interconnected. They're all related to one another. So what's problematic when you try to do Dramatica theory through like ChatGPT or Claude or something like that, it doesn't really know how everything is related to one another. It doesn't know the context of how a story form works, and so it will tell you, it will give you, it will validate story forms that aren't legal, like you can't actually make them. And when we talk about legal story forms, we're talking about story forms that fit within the rules of the theory. Like they are, they fit with the concepts of the theory. There's a whole lot of thinking that goes behind this, and getting to the actual one story form for your particular story is kind of the process of what you would do here. With Narova, you can get really close, and there's a bunch of stuff that I did in the background to teach it how Dramatica works without having access to something like this. And I actually think it worked pretty well, but it works 5,000 times better now that it has access to this. So even though you as a human being can come in here and click and choose things, Narova also has access to this, so that then when it's helping to analyze work or help you get to the one story form, it can very quickly look up and see, well, what's a perfectly aligned story form, and not have to keep all of those rules in context, which can sometimes get lost. Sometimes it'll work, sometimes it won't. But now it's going to be much more closer to what Dramatica theory is all about. So you'll see up here in the Storyform Builder, there's 32,768 possible story forms. So because we have 8 dynamics here on the left, and because there is, I mean, actually, I think if you just chose the pivotal elements here, it would lock everything into place. Once you have these all set, they all multiply whatever it is, 16 times 4 times. It adds up to 32,000. And if you know anything about computers, you're like, well, that's just 32K. And that's exactly right. And you'll see here, so there's 58 choices here on the current screen. And so, very instance, one of the aspects of a story is the main character resolve, which is about whether or not the main character of the story alters their nature in response to the problem, like completely alters it and tries a completely different approach, or they retain their essential nature throughout. And both are valid story forms. And so if I come here and I choose resolve, you'll see that there's 2 options that I have. One is change, which would be altering your nature in response to the problem. And then the other one is steadfast. So a change would be like Star Wars or The Matrix or Top Gun, the original one. Steadfast would be stuff like Silence of the Lambs, Memento, Gladiator, Braveheart, those kind of stories where the main character is like, no, I'm going to keep my nature. I might get challenged. I might get all my guts ripped out, but by the end, freedom, I'm still on the same track. So, one of the first things you would want to do is choose, well, I'm going to either have a story where do I know this ahead of time, where I want a story where the main character completely alters their nature, or is it something that they're just going to remain steadfast with? So if you choose change, you'll see what happens is it'll align and check everything, make sure it's all good, and then come back and tell you, all right, well, now you're down to 16,384 story forms. So you essentially just cut it in half. You won't really see anything else that's changed. That's a dynamic that can apply across 16,000 stories. So it still works. If I change my mind, I could reset it. The other really fun thing I have in here is an undo redo. So you can step back, go forward, kind of backtrack your different choices. So I could just hit undo and it'll clear it out. It'll essentially be the same thing as the reset and come back to 32,000. So assuming now, see, the other reason why I don't really have this, right, didn't have this in subtext, is it's very reliant on you knowing everything there is to know about dramatic theory, which can be super intimidating. It's nice to have so that in presentations you can show, well, this is actually what Dramatica is doing in the background, and there's a whole lot of stuff that's going on here. Um, so if this is completely intimidating, you can just use Narova, and like I said, it has access to this and can make all those selections for you. Plus, it'll have a good idea of those choices that you made and choices that are inferred, and give greater weight to the ones that you've made, because that's the most important part. So, for instance, let's say I wanted to do a story about that. Like, I just want a story where the main character completely alters who they are in response to the problem. The other half of that arc is their growth throughout the narrative. So whereas the resolve is typically you compare the end of the narrative with the beginning of the narrative. If they are have altered their nature and there's a change, then you can say that it's change. If they have remained steadfast, then it's steadfast. The part in between is tracked by the growth. And that one's a little different in that it could either be start or stop. And this to me is this is the one concept when I was first discovered Dramatica back in 95, 96. I thought this was the most elegant thing I'd ever seen because I'd really been into story narrative. I thought I was going to be a storyboard artist when I was at Cal Arts. I went to Robert McKee's story seminar and got yelled at. But when I saw this, what I loved is there were no caveats. And it was a 50-50 thing. There's some stories that are moving into, adding or beginning something new. And there are other stories that are about removing or ending it. You have both. And in all of these choices, there's balance with everything. It's really about what is the point of inflection or where are you positioning the important parts of the narrative that you want to tell. And you might not even know it. They might just come up naturally. But you'll see I've got 8,000 a piece, which would be, splitting 16,000 in half. And just depending on other dynamics, starts are usually a little lighter because it's less about being chased by problems. It's more about moving into them or moving into solutions. Somewhat. I don't want to say too much, but whereas stop might be, there's like kind of a greater weight that's there that you want to move away from. So I think for right now, I'm just going to do just by virtue of an example, I'll just pick start. So again, it's going to align it, check it with everything else. And now we're down to 8,000 story forms. All right. Well, I'm getting closer, but I still don't know anything else about my story. The next one is the main character approach. And you'll notice like the first four are about the main character, the next four are about the story. That's reflecting the idea that both character and plot are interwoven. They're both essential. There aren't character driven stories, there aren't plot driven stories. They're both one half subjective, the other half objective. So the third one here is the approach, which is asking whether or not the main character of your story first blush, like when they first encounter conflict, do they seek solutions externally and they go to do something, change the world first and then might adapt themselves? Or are they the kind of person that adapts themselves first and then takes action? And again, there's tons of story. Most of your Marvel comic book superhero movies, actually all of them, are about doers. I'm going to punch first and ask questions later. What could I say about most? I would say there are other stories where the character will change who they are in response. So the classic example would be Casablanca, where, hey, that's really cool. I'm glad you guys want freedom, but I don't do anything for anybody. My ex girlfriend shows up. I could care less about you. He's like changing himself. And he goes and he drinks. Frequently, stories that focus on using drink as a response to problems are not so much like you're doing the drinking because it's not like you're fumbling the glass to your mouth and that's what the story's about. It's more about trying to change who you are internally to deal with the problems that are going on. So I'm just going to pick doer, and you'll see that as soon as I pick that, it's going to take a little bit longer. Actually, I thought I was going to do something, but I still have yet to choose something else. Um, so now we're down to 4,000. So we've gone from 32,000. We've just made three choices, and we're down to 4,000. Well, over here on the right, you'll see the four through lines. You'll see the objective story source of conflict, the main character, the influence character, and the relationship story. And they are arranged in this way on purpose, where the objective story and the relationship story are on this sort of diagonal axis, and the main character and the influence character are on the diagonal axis. That's really super important in Dramatica theory because anytime you have these alignments like that, it's describing what is known as a dynamic pair, which has the greatest source of conflict, the greatest sense of conflict. It's like pretty much, what you would want out of a complete story. What's really fun that I was able to do in this is if I come up here, I have two choices now. Um, and that is because I have chosen these other two growth of start and doer. So for instance, I'm going to get rid of this one. Let me go back. I'll get rid of the doer. And then when I go into the objective story, there should be four. All right. So there's four choices, which would split these 8,000 into 2,000 piece. There are plots where they're about the fixed external state of things. So being locked in a haunted mansion and you try to escape, or there's some guy that's trying to kill you and everybody's locked in there, or something like Lord of the Flies, where it's about a bunch of kids marooned on a desert island. Once they get off, the story's over. Physics is like Top Gun Maverick, any sort of a lot of Marvel comic book superhero things where it's all about punching, fighting, and kicking. Psychology is when you're either dealing with dysfunctional psychologies from a comedic aspect, like maybe the death of Stalin, or you know, Four Weddings and a Funeral, My Big Fat Greek Wedding. A lot of romantic comedies have this where the two families come together and they're all kind of crazy. That would be psychology. And then the last one would be mind, which is less common in film, just because it's a little more difficult to capture, much more easier to capture in a play or a musical. So stuff like Hamilton and Tick Tick Boom, To Kill a Mockingbird. Is To Kill a Mockingbird? Yeah, that's right. To Kill a Mockingbird's in there. Um, but that's a novel. What was the one I was thinking of? Hamlet. Anytime you have a play, it's much easier because you can communicate usually their inner ambitions and drives. So I got rid of doer here, so I have these four choices. When I pick uh, doer, if I go back, actually, let me see if I redo. That should put doer back. Cool. So when I put doer back in there and I'm back, now I just have these two, and that's because when you have a main character whose approach is doer, then their domain now gets just cut off into two areas. And if you'll notice, these are both external things. So if you remember, it doesn't have psychology or mind. And that's because we chose doer as where the main character's focus is, their initial sense of how it is that they're going to go about resolving the story or resolving the problems around them. So that's just one way of how all of these aspects are related together. And the problem that most people get into when they write, even if they don't know any Dramatica theory, is they will have conflicting elements that don't add up to a thematically consistent story form. And it's exactly the issue if you try to use any other sort of AI stuff with Dramatica theory and you try to just like plug it in and load it up with stuff. If you don't have everything that's set up like what we have here, you're going to get contradictory elements. It's going to tell you you can do different things like, oh, for sure, this is, you're going to have your main character through line here and your influence character through line there. Part of that is because your story might actually be trying to do something that's not a complete story and it's trying to like answer that and put it in the right spot, but yet without the context of how everything is supposed to line up, it'll just tell you, yeah, go for it. You can do it. And then you're not any better than you were without it, except you've been glazed by the AI and you think you're amazing. So here with the main character in their source of conflict as being either universe or physics, the difference would be for just the main character and them themselves. Are they dealing personally with some sort of fixed external state, um, like Luke in the first Star Wars? He's like the planet that's farthest away. He's like, I got to get off this stupid rock. Or anybody else like Maverick, who's like the hotshot, but his dad like did it wrong. Any sort of superhero who's supposed to be the king, but they're not the king, like Black Panther or something like that. The main character's dealing with a universe issue, like their place within the universe is out. Physics would be they're their own worst enemy in terms of all the things they do. They're always creating trouble. The one that comes to mind is The Spider-Man, the animated one, the multiverse one, super cool one, where Miles is it's not so much that he's Spider-Man and he has to be that thing, the objective story is dealing with all the universes colliding, but he himself is dealing with being able to take action. And when he takes action, it creates more problems for himself. Can he perform and do the things that he's supposed to do? So typically, I always talk about this really popular story form that is the most popular story form for the United States. And that's because we tend to like to focus on the same sort of conflict, and especially in Western society. And for something like Marvel Cinematic Universe and Star Wars, that kind of area, it's almost always the same story form, which is why you feel like, oh man, I've seen this before. So, for instance, like the Black Panther and Lion King are literally the same exact story form. So, not only are there similar shots, um, they're dealing with the same exact arc as we go through. Out of the 32,000, they have picked the same exact story form. So in that one, usually the main character is in the universe. Now watch, if you focus on where I have main character source of conflict, when I pick this, you'll see it jumped over here. Now, this is super exciting because if you've used the story engine before from Dramatica, you know it will stay there. And then if you have a mental model of how the Dramatica model is set up, it's really conflicting and it kind of throws you off. So this is inside baseball for heavy Dramatica users, but I was able to work it out with the robots over this weekend, and they helped me very quickly figure out how to do this so that when you pick a certain domain, so you're kind of setting the general area of where all the conflict is in that through line, it will align the other through lines to match and put them in a strict Dramatica model. I keep looking over here because I have the whole poster on my wall. When you have just the model at rest, the table of story elements, universe is always in the upper left, physics is always in the upper right, psychology is in the lower left, and then mind is always in the lower right. So all I did was just rearrange the different through lines here automatically so that you could see balanced out in terms of the mental model of the Dramatica theory where all the through lines would be situated. And you'll see it inferred three different options. So blue are all the choices that I've made, and then three is telling me, all right, well, if that's the kind of story you want to tell, this is where conflict needs to be for those other through lines to create a balanced and thematically consistent narrative. So, and these are dependent upon the dynamics that I have set over here. So I already talked about doer and how that has to force the main character either into universe or physics. When I pick start here, what that does is that ensures that the relationship between the main character through line and between the objective story through line, that it's always in this vertical dependent relationship. And that's because if you think of it, if you're in a narrative and you're in this mindset of like, hey, I have this universe problem. And then at the same time, if you're able to step outside of yourself and see, like, okay, well, now we're dealing with all these dysfunctional psychologies, you have objective and subjective split out between external and internal. And so they have to start moving into the same area so that they can identify where the actual source of conflict for the entire narrative is. So the inequity of the narrative is pretty much this like negative space in here in between all four through lines. And so what happens is when you are working through a narrative and you're trying to get a sense of what things are going to resolve the conflict, how you're going to move on, um, how are you going to fix all the problems? You do that by collapsing objective and subjective into one. So this is a story form that has everything split out in a narrative or in the story itself, the book or the film. They're all connected into one another, interwoven. So when you have a start, it's like you have to start. Okay, I'm locked into this fixed external state. I've got to like move into the internal so I can see, is it me that's the problem? Is it everybody else that's the problem? That's why that dynamic exists. And then always the main character and the influence character again will always be diagonally opposed, and the objective story and the relationship story are always going to be opposed. And the reason for that is for the main character, if you think of that cliche line about, you and I are both alike, and it's like, no, I'm nothing like you. Yes, you are. You're just a shadow self of me, all that stuff. Well, the reason why that comes up is the main character is just the I perspective of the narrative, and the influence character is the you perspective. So, depending on whether or not it's the main character looking out at the influence character and saying, you have a problem, or it's the influence character saying, hey, you've got a problem, or you and I are both alike. The reason why is because you'll see they're both fixed. So, even though one is external, one's internal, they're both about a fixed external state. So that they're in some respects they are alike. They're both locked into this sort of fixed nature. But on the other hand, they're not alike because one's external and one's internal. So that's why that conversation comes up. It's not because somebody just made it up and we should do this in every story. It's because those writers who worked on that recognize the power of that statement in informing the audience, especially if they don't know Dramatica theory, informing the audience who the main character is, who the influence character is, and what is going on in there. So that's about the relationship between all of them. And if I wanted to flip, and I was talking about the typical story form, if I went into start and instead I made it stop, it should flip the objective story and the relationship story. So now you'll see it's moved the objective story into the upper right and the relationship story into the lower left. To just flip the two of them. And the reason why it's doing that is because now I'm saying, no, you know what? I don't want to talk about moving into something. I want to talk about getting rid of something and removing it, ending it. So then now that will ensure, in order to have a thematically consistent narrative, you would want both main character and objective story to be both external, because now it's like really confusing. So you have to stop being external and move out into the internal. Like just get rid of that so we can see what the difference is. And I can tell. It's almost like when you're in the story and you're experiencing it, you have everything all folded in together, and then you want to like split it out so I can see, oh, okay, this is where the problem is. So that's just a couple inferences between all the through lines and where you have all the sources of conflict, because you're always looking for the source of conflict in the through line, and then also how that relates to some of the dynamics. So, Alexi, how does the engine relate to Narova itself? I mean, I can switch between two modes and they will be aligned. Great, great, great question. Let's say you got to this point and you think, all right, that's enough for me for right now. You'll see there's like a little copy button here. So, what I can do is I can just copy this. And if I went into Narova, which should be, that's funny. Oh, is it here? Where did I put it? Oh, let me go because I don't want to lose this. So let's do put in a new tab. All right. And then, so I just copied that into the clipboard. And then if I just go into Narova and make this a little bigger so you can see it. And I just say, story forming, help me work on this story form. I'm not sure about the rest of the parts of the story form yet. So, and then I just copied it. So all did it copied over all the ones that were user selected. So you can see the different, these are the ones that I chose. And Narova knows to give those more weight, like they're more important. And then here are the inferred ones. And then we can go out and start to develop it. So that way you're not locked into, I can't do anything until I get to one story form, which was like the early version of Subtxt. Now you can start to develop it even if you don't have a complete picture of what that might look like. And then I'll show how you can get to a complete story form here in a second. Go back to the builder. All right. So again, let's see, back to the builder here. We have our three dynamics and then where the through lines are. All right. So let's pretend I've been hired by Disney, and they really want to see how can they take all of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but find a way to create different experiences and not tell the same story over and over again. Maybe give them something different. Well, the first thing I would do is show them how everything has been the same, which would be these three dynamics, this setup here, and then I would set the problem solving style. You have a choice between linear and holistic, which is essentially is the main character. This is really about the whole narrative, but you can see it more in the main character. Do they work more in terms of cause and effect, like one, two, three, four, or do they see the balance between things and they can kind of like, you know, see how it all fits together? This is where I tell everybody that this is why anybody who says Star Wars and The Matrix are the same hero's journey story are completely wrong, because Star Wars, Luke is very much cause and effect. Gosh darn it, why can't I get off this rock? I can do this, I can do that. Hey, let me just go up the hill and see if I can find my droid. Oh, I get hit in the head. Very cause and effect. Whereas the Matrix, Neo is completely all about balancing his relationships with everybody and the context of what's going on around him. Completely two completely different stories. Not even close. So that also invalidates Hero's Journey. So linear and holistic, you would want to pick, and I mean, so for typically, there's a whole bunch of different reasons why, but usually audience wise, linear is I mean, if you just think of all your Winter Soldier, Black Panther, everybody, they're all cause and effect, right? The only one that would be holistic, I would say, would be WandaVision, which is why a lot of people are like, I don't know if I like this, but it's kind of okay, but it's kind of off. That would be the only one. Um, I still think it had issues towards the end, but uh, that would be the difference there. So I'm going to pick linear, and that's going to narrow that down to 1,000, 1K. I'm sure for you computer nerds out there. All right, so we have change, stop, do, or linear. Then the next dynamic would be a choice between whether or not the major plot points of a story are either action or decision. So if you look at your starting story driver and the act breaks for each act and the concluding one, in a thematically consistent narrative, they will all be of the same type. They will all be actions that then force the characters to come up with decisions in order to resolve inequity, or they will be decisions that then force people to take action. So an action driven story is Jaws. Somebody get every every act break is somebody getting eaten. Um, and then it's like, wait, we got to close down the beach, right? Like they would never have closed down the beach if people had not been eaten, and maybe not even not make a decision. Whereas decision driven, the fun one is, I mean, any sort of courtroom drama. Clearly, like there's a decision that has to be met, and by the end of it, they make a choice whether somebody's guilty or not guilty. So anytime you have courtroom drama, it's usually that. Gangster film, Godfather is decision driven, where, you know, hey, the drug trade sounds really cool, more power to you, but I don't want anything to do with that. And it's like, okay, we're gonna have to like take you out. So they would never have tried to take him out if he hadn't made the decision to not go into the drug trade. So that's a really strong decision driven story. Every Marvel superhero is action driven, right? So now we're down to 512. Nothing else has changed here on the right. So the next one is the story limit, which not necessarily encapsulates the narrative, but instead talks about the landscape of the narrative and whether or not you are you have this sense that um, there is a deadline or some sort of set amount of time to which when things will need to be resolved, or there's a set of options and it's just the ticking of those away. So, and you have to be really careful on this, because there's a difference between how what the characters within the subjective experience of the story and the audience, what they feel versus what the author feels, and they're opposite. So in a time limit, story limit, when climax is forced by the time limit, the characters will feel like they're running out of options. As the clock ticks down, it's like, oh, we only have 3 hours left. Okay, we can only do this and we can do this. Because they're being limited by time objectively. The converse is true for option story. So, um, like seven, you have seven deadly sins. Once they figure out, oh, this guy's going through each of the sins, when they only have three or two, we got to figure out, we don't have much time left because we're getting close to the end because there's only like two left. There's only one. Well, what are we going to do? So you just have to be really, really careful of that. Almost 80%, 85% of stories for lots of different reasons are option bound. You occasionally have time. I don't know any sort of Marvel thing, but something, if you have time in the title, like 48 hours or 28 days, 28 days later, that kind of thing. It's very much time based, but for the most part, this is defaulted to options. So now we're down to 256 and the outcome of the story. So the last two are the ending of the story. One is the more objective. Did the plot end in success or failure? Whether or not the original goal that they set out to was achieved or whether or not they failed. And then the judgment is, I mean, it is story wide, so it's supposed to be for everybody. It's for the entire narrative as a whole, but really you can find it within the main character where if they resolve their personal issues, then it's said to be good because it's like, all right, well, we worked through all this stuff and it was a good, because I was able to fulfill get some fulfillment out of it and work through some personal problems. If it's bad, I mean, if they don't work through their issues, things get worse, like Silence of the Lambs, like the lambs are still screaming, so she hasn't gotten over her personal problems. There's tons of success, like they got the bad guy, but she still has that yuckiness feeling. Um, Same thing with like Unforgiven, right? I'm not going to be a killer. I promised my wife, and then it's like, all right, well, I ended up achieving everything that I set out to do. I got the reward money, but now I'm a killer and I hate my life. So that's that. This would be, so if I chose success, this will go down to 128, and then if I chose bad, and we're probably down to 64. So, this used to be my favorite set of dynamics. It's why I love the TV show Secession, because pretty much every single episode is geared towards this, where they'll set out whatever the problem is in that episode. They succeed, they get exactly what they want, but they're way better, worse for it. So that's success bad. Most Marvel superhero Star Wars stuff, it's always good, right? Um, yeah, I just had a thought with the not Ashoka. What was there was another Star Wars one where they tried to rewrite the Force and it was about threads. The most recent one where they're singing in front of a big giant hole. That one should have been holistic. It's weird. It's like everybody wanted it to be this intuitively, but then it was forced into this other thing, which is why it felt so awkward and so like off. So the reason why you have a story form, or the reason why it's important to get, is to get the context set. And you can just think of it in terms of AI. If you don't have context set, you can work in chat and you can start to develop a story, and then it's going good, and then all of a sudden it all gets lost, and you're like, oh, why am I wasting my time with this? Because there's no set context. It's the same thing developing a story even without AI by yourself. If you don't have a consistent story mind, the story form in mind, and then you're all over the place, and then you'll create, I can't think of the name of that show, but you'll create something that is thematically inconsistent and almost impossible to watch because it's narratively just doesn't work. None of it works. That's one of the reasons why you would want to find a story form for your work. So these are the 8 dynamics that are usually found in almost every single um, action adventure like boy movie, right? So the last one, these are also new, where I have added in what I actually consider to be one of the most important parts of Dramatica theory. And it's kind of like subtext Dramatica theory 2.0, which would be the pivotal element. Now, in original Dramatica theory, these were called crucial elements. And then there was a lot of talk about how they're not crucial. We probably shouldn't have called them crucial. They're not that important. When I set about building subtext and trying to find a way to get across the story form and the meaning of the story form without relying on this sort of story form builder, it became really quickly clear that these are really, really, really super important. And you can see just by virtue of this, the fact that there's now only 64 remaining choices, they're all just narrowed down to this pivotal element. So you'll see there's one for each. These are 64 elements. These are the elements that are at the very base of the model, which describe the motivating force. In this particular narrative, it'll be the problem that motivates both the main character and the objective story. These are really pivotal, and they're because they are the pivot point between the main character and the objective story. So in the current version of the theory, the bias is very heavily geared towards main character through line and objective story through line. Culturally, it just works out in terms of dynamic pairs, all that stuff. Giving the bias to these two and then letting the relationship story and the influence character kind of go along secondarily works out great. It's like perfect for 80%, 85% of narratives. Uh, and part of that is the pivot point between the subjective and the objective, the pivot point between the main character and the objective story, main character, the pivot point between character and plot. And I have found that over the 30 years of working with Dramatica theory, these are so important because there can be kind of when you're trying to figure out the story form, you might not be able to figure out exactly the one that feels really great. But if you were to look at both the main character and the influence character, and kind of going back to that argument of you and I are both alike, that exists throughout the entire model. So on a broader scale, sure, you're in universe, I'm in mine, we're both fixed. No, I'm external, you're internal. But then also deep down low to kind of keep everything all cohesive and fit together, you would have these pivotal elements, which will be a dynamic pair. So I'm just going to pick the one that is oh, I clicked the wrong thing. Let me go back one, which is every single, this is the most popular story form in Western culture, the most popular story form for Marvel, Star Wars, all that kind of stuff. So if I go down to avoid and I click avoid, these would be stories where the main character is avoiding or escaping, avoiding taking action. They're supposed to be the one, they don't want to be the one. Very simply, you can think of the Lion King. You're supposed to be the king. I don't want to be the king. I killed my dad. Um, and they go off and hide. They run away, run away, run away until at the end they turn around and go the other direction. And that's how you know that the story has been resolved. So a bunch of stuff has happened. You'll know it instantly jump down to one remaining story form. You'll see that everything else has been filled out. So if I go down here, all of this other stuff is inferred just from these 10 choices. I've just made 10 choices and I have everything down to one complete story form. And this is the most popular. I mean, I could talk about a bunch of different films that all fit into this one. You'll notice too, the main character and influence character, these are what are known as dynamic pairs, meaning in the same way that universe and mind are on that diagonal, avoid and pursuit in the model are always on a diagonal with each other. And that's because they're two sides of the same coin. So if you ever listen to Alan Watts, anytime he talks about two sides of the same coin, any sort of inequity, that kind of can't have black without white, or is it black and white without color? Um, you listen to any of his tapes, he's talking about a Dramatica story form, and he's talking about these are two sides of the same coin. In the same way that universe and mind are two sides of the same coin, here at a very minute level, avoid, preventing or escaping if you're going to talk about preventing or escaping, you also have to talk about a directed effort forward because one doesn't exist without the other. That's how you know that they're dynamic pairs. That's why you have a main character and an influence character. You have some character who's always avoiding, 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 and then some other character who's pursuing, pursuing, pursuing. So Black Panther, running away, and then his brother or whatever, I forget, the guy with all the bumps. I love it. It's great, but he's always pursuit, pursuit, pursuit. They fight, they fight, they fight, and then one wins at the end. Um, Anytime you have a story that is about running away from something, the solution automatically is pursuing it, is going towards it. So you'll see here, everything else has been inferred based on those two elements. And you'll notice that the main character and the objective story both share the same problem. So if you were to analyze and look at these this story, both the plot that everybody's dealing with and then the main character's internal baggage all has to do with some form of running away from something. Then the solution is for both the main character to go forward, um, and then that resolves the objective story. It's usually set up because of the way that it's written that the main character resolves their personal issues, which then allows them to solve the bigger picture. It doesn't have to be that way. Yeah, like ET, Elliot eventually is able to let go. It's funny because in ET, these are flipped. It's pursuit. Is it pursuit and avoid? Actually, it might be the same. I forget. Um, yeah, it might be. I forget if they're flipped or not. I'll have to look at it then. Actually, let's just go look real quick. If I come in here and I go ET, because I think the first season of Stranger Things is the same as ET. Yeah. So this one's flipped. Yeah, pursuit is the problem and avoid. And it's the same exact thing for that first season of Stranger Things. Or is it the other way around? I'll have to look and see. Oh, sorry, I didn't show you that. What I was doing was I was sharing this tab. So all I did is I went into Subtxt and I just pulled up the ET story form. So you'll see these are flipped. Elliot's pursuit and ET is avoid. So these two are flipped. This would probably be like the second most popular story form because you can see it's a 1 degree of difference. It's important because a story about problems that are coming from people going for stuff and then they have to avoid it is much different than a story about people who are avoiding things and going after it. In fact, when I taught at CalArts, every single story, every student film had pursuit as the problem, like they were trying to live their dreams and pursue it. They would get really super overwhelmed, and then their character would find some way to run away from it, and it would turn out to be a good thing. So that it's the flip of that. But this one is the typical one. So avoid is the problem, and the reason why it's considered a pivotal element is because it's the pivot point between the main character and the objective story. They will share these two similar elements, both the main character and the influence character. Here, you can see this on screen here as well as seeing it down here. But you'll also see everything else has been filled out. We know what the goal of the story is. We know what is required to get to that goal. We know the kind of prerequisites that are necessary for people to do the requirements in order to get to the goal. We know some of the preconditions that are in place that make it more difficult because of the people they have to deal with in order to get to that goal. We know some dividends that are won along the way. We know costs, kind of like what that's going to cost for us. We have some forewarnings when things are getting worse, and then we have the consequence. If we don't get this goal, this is what's going to happen. If Simba doesn't come back and take over the kingdom, then the kingdom is going to transform into this place where there's hyenas everywhere and they're running the whole thing. So, and this would be that would be a case where the consequence you're seeing it as the story's going on. Like, what are the stakes? These are everything's changing. The landscape is literally transforming. You need to come back and save, you know, save the world. It's the same thing as Mad Max Road Rage, Fury Road. What was that one? Where literally, it's funny too because I think the same thing in Lion King. They go one direction cinematically, and then when they have their change, they end up cinematically going the other direction, which is just a visual representation of a void in pursuit. It's the same thing that's going on here. I know in fact for a fact Lion King does that where he turns around and he's running and stuff. Because he's embraced that pursuit, which then allows him to pursue Scar, which then allows him to save the day. Um, yeah, and you can see things that have been inferred. So just because it's the easiest thing to talk about, but the whole Lion King thing, his unique ability is his willingness to be open to new things. Like I can't wait to be king. Oh, let me try out this thing. Let me explore this. Let me eat a bunch of bugs. That openness is what eventually gets him to the place where he's open to the idea of coming back and saving things. The first thing he needs to do though is get rid of this critical flaw, which is this refusal to let go of the fact that he killed his dad. So he's living in that state of denial, or he's been denied the truth. So that's something he has to overcome. Whereas the influence character is about bringing something to an end, where what's holding them back are their preconceptions, the refusal to evaluate. This is kind of sort of a Mufasa slash Rafiki handoff thing, where you know you think I'm this great person, but I'm not, which kind of lessens the impact that the influence character has. All right, so this is like the greatest singular story form that everybody uses. And so what I thought was really fun is I went into um, Narrova. I think it's this one. Let's see. And what I did is, oh, maybe I should show you. So now that I have, where is it? We're back here still. Now that I have the one story form, you'll notice up here on the right, it says open in Narrova. So now that you have a one complete story form, you can actually set it as context. You don't have to rely on the AI to kind of understand where you're coming from and save it for you, although that has been made so much less brittle that it shouldn't be an issue. But this is a for sure thing. Like, okay, I really want this story form here. And I'm just going to call this um, a story name. Let's call it the next Marvel movie, not. And we'll say every single story previously. And the difference is you can think of in Narova, there's two major contexts, or there's three, but the two most important are the story, which is kind of like your big giant folder, world building, character, all that stuff. And then the actual specific story form. So you can have two different contexts going on there. So if I open this up in Narova, I will zoom in and you'll see the context has been set for this conversation, and it's been set to both the story and the story form. The story is this open book thing. That's that story. I don't really have anything in there, so it has yet to have documents uploaded to it if I had canon that I wanted to put in there, or character sketches or whatever. And then the story form, you'll see it's here. So you'll notice, look, I've already marked what the MC pivotal and IC pivotal are in here. You have the main character objective story. This is essentially everything that you saw in the Storyform Builder is now here in Narova to build off of. These are great. These are the signposts. So this is essentially what happens in each act. So not only do you identify where the source of conflict is, but because of the way Dramatica is set up, it can predict for you what's supposed to happen in each act. And these are all thematically consistent, and they're going to be different for every story. So, in this, the plot, people are doing things, Scar takes over, whatever, learning, when you go out and you find out that you might have killed your dad. Obtaining is when you lose everything, like, I'm just gonna give it all up, and then at the end, understanding, appreciating, uh, what is required to actually save the day. Whereas the main character is going through their personal journey, the influence character is hitting upon these different things, and then their relationship, or whatever the relationship story through line is to help balance out the plot, is also going through this stuff. We haven't even talked about that, but that's a really key part that is typically not thought of and is usually where most holes in most stories are. But because you now have this context here, you can very easily then just start working on the story, um, and just have it build out the entire thing. So, for instance, I might say this is .com. Do I want to do this for the? No, it's somewhere else. So I might say, okay, I'm I'm working on the next great Marvel movie. I don't know any of the characters. Let's see. I used to love Daredevil more than anything. Um, it's the only one that I really liked. I always loved, uh, but see, Born Again. But they did Born Again, but they don't really do Born Again. I don't know. I always loved it. Oh, let's do. I always loved Daredevil and Elektra, like the old Frank Miller times. So let's invent some sort of scenario between them, um, and then uh, beat it out or give me a good idea of what that might look like. What that might look like given story form and context here. And because it's set to this context, then oh, Foggy Nelson, yeah. Um, it will build it. You know, I'd probably, if I was an actual creator, I'd probably have more of an idea of what that is. I just love Daredevil, Frank Miller, David Mazzucchelli, beautiful artist. So let's just do this for now. And so what it'll do is now that it has the context in there, it'll go out and think through the whole thing and create the whole concept for me. And do it in terms of, oh, put it in the story guide. No, hold on a second. This will come up. So the story guide is when we want to kind of, this is funny because I haven't really come up with the idea yet. So it's like, well, that's a good start, but maybe you want to actually think about the story that you're telling and let's kind of work our way through it. So, oh, okay. Oh, this is actually quite cool. I've never tested this. I thought this was going to fail. So what it's doing is it's actually working through the story guide. Wow. With the story form in mind. The story guide is supposed to be a thing that you do before you have a story form. I do plan on making it so that you'll be able to specifically set the different agents. You know, there's like 6 or 7 of them right now. Um, and I would have done that, but this is actually quite interesting. So, if the story goal is about obtaining something concrete, what single object, code, person, or territory would force every faction in Hell's Kitchen into motion? Aim for something that exposes self interest on all sides and punishes anyone who tries to avoid the fight. So what that's doing is it's looking at the objective story and it's looking at, well, the goal is going to be the same as the concern. So down here at the bottom, the goal is obtaining, and then it's looking at the interests, or I'm sorry, the issue, because all of these are connected, right? So if you're doing a story about people running away from things, self-interest becomes the actual issue. So that that's why it did this whole thing. Aim for something that exposes self-interest on all sides and punishes anyone who tries to avoid the fight. All right. I still remember the last words of Born Again. I live in Hell's Kitchen. My brains. That's all you need to know. Oh, rad. See, I knew you knew what you were talking about. Um, Yeah, that's the greatest series ever. Okay, so and then it went to do the main character. Since the main character arc is changed with a future concern, what ticking future event corners Matt Murdock in a situation he can't ignore or delay, forcing him to stop avoiding and actively pursue? Think system goes live, election in 72 hours, or shipment lands at dawn. Those are all more objective. I would want it to be more. specific, like more personal. With Electra as the influence character rooted in mind subconscious, what buried feeling or preconception keeps pulling her off balance, and how might cold logic be the thing that ultimately steadies her and challenges Matt's conscience temptation dynamic? Do you see what I'm saying? Like, heard this before, and that's because if I go to the story form and I look at the influence character, I mean, her solution is logic, but she's driven by feeling. So it's more about her emotional sense. Here are three high concept sparks aligned to your story form. No copyrighted text, just Miller esque grit and mood. The Atlas Key, a predictive policing network called Atlas, goes live in 72 hours. Whoever controls its master key owns Hell's Kitchen future. Daredevil wants the key to expose Atlas. Elektra's hired to steal and sell it to the highest bidder. All right, I get that. Every step escalates from rooftop pursuits to data center sieges as both burn through their limited options. Temptation versus conscience divines their pull on each other. So this one's really cool because their relationship, if you know anything about them, they're kind of like hooked up with one another. But their relationship story through line will revolve around this idea of temptation and conscience. So, trying to take the easy way out either brings them closer together or pushes them further apart. And maybe at the end, they figure out a way to work with a little bit more conscience. The Widow's Ledger, a blood soaked ledger surfaces naming judges, cops, and CEOs bought by the kitchen syndicates. I love that. Daredevil wants it for daylight prosecutions. Elektra wants to leverage it to end a private war. Each ally they approach dies or flips. Ha, that one's great. Red Right Hand, a bioweapon prototype. Portable denial will be auctioned in a midnight church. Daredevil wants the device to destroy it. Elektra wants it to, permanent ceasefire on her terms. As bodies drop and loyalty snap, the two must decide what they'll become to secure the future together at odds. So this one just fell right into the story guide. I actually really love. Let's see if it'll do this. Widow's Ledger. Okay, I absolutely. Whoops. Absolutely love the Widow's Ledger. So let's take that idea and let's transfer over to story encoding so that I can build out the entire story form, um, because I have a presentation later this afternoon for the producers, and they want to see uh, what I might have in mind for the next season. All right. Because this is a way to really validate your ideas, bounce it against a really consistent story form. You still have to do all the writing and stuff. It's not like it's going to write it for you, but at least you have an idea of, like, you don't have to spend 3 months pinning things up to the wall and talking and going on endless lunches trying to figure out what the story is. Maybe you could have something a lot quicker. And then if they don't want it, you can just try something different. So let's try. This should transfer over to the story encoding agent. If not, I can always do it a different way, but let's see. Clarifying the perspective. All right, come on. Story guide. No, it didn't do it. Oh, it did it. Yay. All right. So it transferred it over to story forming. That's how you can tell that. Oh, it transferred to story forming, though. I wanted story encoding. This should be okay. Quick plan. All right, it's going to go through the plan. I feel like this is still, even though that says story form, what does this guy say? Let's move forward. Let's see what it did. I'll be very interested. So what it's doing is it's going through the entire story form with that idea of the widow's ledger and kind of illustrating. So in Dramatica, you have 4 stages of communication. The first one is the story form, which is what I showed you that you can do with the Storyform Builder. The next one is then, all right, you have avoid and pursuit, but those don't really mean anything. So let's encode each of those with really specific storytelling that excites us, that makes it really fun. Like so you can see here, this is why it's so typical. The city's players avoid exposure at all costs. Witnesses vanish, evidence is burned, safe houses rotate nightly. You can see that motivation to avoid is just creating all the conflict. And then success comes when the heroes pursue the ledger holder relentlessly through a wake turned war zone and seize it for open court daylight. And there are a ton of other aspects that are here in the story. Um, this one's interesting because this is making Matt, his personal issues are more about his role as the protagonist more than something more personal. There's some elements of here he avoids risking civilian witnesses and avoids Electra's methods. Maybe some future about her or some other something with his girlfriend or whatever. So this one's okay. And then here went through all the different story points. Signpost beats by through line. And then what this is doing is for it's each act. So it has the cold open, then like these were all the murders would happen, learning, investigating, then some sort of um, double crossing, they lose it, they're going to give up, that kind of thing, and then at the end they understand how it all works out. This one is definitely too objective and not enough personal, but I just wanted to show. Okay, and then here's teaser to finale spine and then an executive summary. So this would be the thing like deck ready that I could present to producers to see if they wanted to approve it. I don't know if I'm in the actual. I feel like this is still the story guide. Let's see. Another time. I say yeah. Okay. And Mike, that's because I fixed it. There was an issue with context, which I told you the robots and I figured out how to fix that. All right. So I don't think I'm in story. I'm gonna try one more time. I'm gonna try story encoding. This is a one way to force the hand to the story encoding. I will do a drop down here, like a model picker thing where you can pick story encoding. Um, story encoding. What you have so far is great, but Matt's through line needs to be more personal. Something about him and just him that has to do with uh, maybe his physical disability, maybe something to do with him getting his eyesight back. That is, man, oof. Is that an awful idea? I'm just trying to make something that's like personal, that's more universe based, like it's his sort of personal issues. Or it could be that um, maybe his girlfriend, I forget her name from Born Again, is back in town and he sees a future with her. Um, whichever one you think is best, choose that one and let's rewrite his through line to be more personal. So it's not him as protagonist, because you really want that main character through line to give it. He's definitely going to be the protagonist, so he's going to do all the stuff that's listed in there. But that's in the objective story, not in the main character. Karen, thank you. No, it's too late now. It's too late because I don't have a stop button. I will get that stop button rolled out sooner than later. All right. This is way too much fun. I had no idea that this is what I was going to do, but let's see. This should be enough to transfer it to story encoding. Come on. You can do it. Karen Page. Isn't it Paige though? I think it is. I think it did it. It probably should have indicated that it went to story encoding. Oh, you know what? No, I think I have it set up so you can do that. Well, what is the problem? His blindness is a concrete condition. The clinical trial exists on a fixed calendar with strict eligibility. Okay, so within a narrow window, An experimental surgical gene therapy could partially restore Matt's vision, but the only viable slot overlaps with the citywide scramble for the widow's letter. So do you see how there's like that inequity now between the personal and the plot? And it fits thematically with it. So if he delays any further, the trial closes. If he moves too fast or takes the wrong route, he risks becoming beholden to the syndicate Windows circle who can grease access for a price. Um, I feel like that's too easy because he's like blind. The possibility of sight, what kind of a man he could become, hangs over every choice this week. He keeps pushing the consult. So this would be more of a main character thing. And maybe I like this. This could be a thing too, like if you're working with a team or working with a producer and you're not sure, you could try out different ideas. So I'll do this blind thing and then pitch it. And if they like screw their face up, then you have one in your back pocket. Um, Interesting. Quick table. So this is all his personal stuff. Okay. All right. Okay. All of that was great. Um, but let's try the other one where it's something about him and Karen Page having a future. What would that look like? So you can very quickly try out different story ideas that will remain thematically consistent with everything. It's almost like you just wrote the entire next draft. Obviously, it's not actually written, but the concept of it, you figured out the whole concept just by resetting the storytelling. So the story form is going to stay the same, but now, all right, let's not make it about him being blind and getting over that. Now let's make it about some sort of future hope with Karen, something like that. So, and it'll help, realign itself. So you want Matt's main character through line to be more personal about him alone, centered on the possibility of a shared future with Karen Page. We'll keep him outside of the protagonist seat here. This is the private eye line that runs alongside the objective story chase for the Widow's Ledger. And so it's rewriting that aspect of the story form with the idea of tomorrow's with Karen. So Karen has re-entered the city under a federal cooperation agreement tied to the Ledger case. Oh, okay, this is kind of nice. If she testifies, she must enter relocation within 72 hours of filing. The relocation order is a fixed external situation. Matt keeps delaying the conversation, avoiding a definitive choice about whether there's a future together and what it would look like. Perfect. That makes it way more personal. And I would probably make it so they don't end up together. So then it went through each signpost talking about how things are changing. They probably, oh, cool. They face the born again wound, betrayal, forgiveness, and their history of breaking each other by degrees. So that'd be the past. Two concrete futures are on the table. I know this is about the two people, but I would really write it from Matt's point of view and then present. Okay, they walk a quiet block at dawn. No guarantees, but a real plan. The future isn't a fantasy. It's paperwork, therapy, boundaries, and a date on a lease. All right. That actually worked quite good. That'll be really fun too with Electra there. My 14-year-old self is really excited about this. Universe, future delay, postponing intake, logistics, and the conversation is up. Yeah, so kind of like dodging commitment, and then at the end pursues an active plan. Maybe he's dodging that commitment the whole time, putting it off as long as he possibly can. When Karen returns under a relocation clock, Matt keeps delaying the talk about their future until the only way to keep that future honest is to pursue a lawful, accountable plan in the middle of a city on fire and sign for it now. Okay, I don't mind that. All right. At any rate, that's super cool, and I'm going to get lost in doing this whole thing. So maybe I'll do this offline. What I want to do is just show something else, but let's see what. Yeah, the practical thinking for pitch meetings, totally. Yeah, because I can try something else, or they could, and then you just bring Narova into the room, and everybody naturally will see like, oh, that's a cool idea. But what if we tried this? And then you can just throw in different ideas, and it will always guide it back towards the story form, but allow for those ideas to come into play. It's just keeping the context set. How might you use this to create a single episode in a series? Create a story form for the season arc and a separate story form for individual episodes that share elements from the series arc. A really great thing to look at is to open up Subtext and go into the whole secession thing. So if I go into secession, we have the first two seasons. So I go to season one, right? So this is the story form for the entire season. All right. So if I come down here and I look at the signposts, these say transits, but just think signposts. And there are 10 episodes for that first season of Secession. The first three episodes have, well, it breaks down. This is episodes 1 through 3. 4 is kind of this like extra one, which really isn't part of the um, overarching story. It's that sad sack boop-a-doop show, whatever they call it. It actually functions as the driver that then kicks into the middle 5 and 6 episodes, which are when he tries to manipulate and scheme his way to the board and kick his dad out, but then he gets caught in traffic. That midpoint part there, that's these two, 5 and 6. 7 and 8 are when he's out. They go to New Mexico. He's taking drugs. The bachelor party. That's very much Bean. And then the last two episodes, the wedding, that's literally a wedding, is becoming, transforming, Shiv and Tom. So, and there's all kinds of different ways that you can break it up. But what's neat about the first season is the connection point between this overarching story form and the individual episodes is the goal of each episode matches the objective story signpost that are present here. So if I went into the first, so we have conceiving, conceptualizing, being, becoming. If I go to the first episode of that first season and I say secession, season one, episode one, yeah, celebration, you'll see that the goal here is conceiving. So it's really clever because it connects the um, individual episode story forms with the larger overarching story. So you'll see here conceiving. So that is the actual goal of that first episode. If I went to episode 2, it's probably the same thing, right? Secession, season 1, episode 2. Oh, this one's S show at the F factory. You'll see this one should be conceiving as well, right? Yeah, conceiving. First 3 episodes, all the same. Let's look at those middle 2 episodes, which would be 5 and 6. Episode, yeah, 5 and 6. I just saw it. I went to market, and whose side are you on? Oh, I think 5 and 6, this is interesting. 5 and 6 are actually one story form. So the first half of the story form, it's like a cliffhanger, is episode 5. It completes in episode 6. And this should be conceptualizing. Yeah. Which is what the second signpost of the big story form arc is. If I go to one of those, the New Mexico one, which I think is episode 7, Austerlitz. Yeah, isn't that it? It should be Bean. Yep, Bean. And so then that connects 7, and then 8, I think, is the bachelor party. And then 9 and 10, I think, are the same thing as 5 and 6. Season 1, episodes 9 and 10. Yeah, same thing where the first half of the story form is episode 9, and then the conclusion, no one is ever missing, is the last. Uh, yeah, it's the last part of the story form, becoming. So, and you'll see failure bad because it all ends in failure and it all ends very bad for poor Kendall. So that, yeah, that's how you would connect. That's one way to connect it. There's lots of different ways. Um, Mrs. Maisel, the season 1 pilot is its own story form, and then the rest of the season is a complete story form. So she's the change character in the first episode, right? Like she's super perfect housewife, and then ends up kind of a little naughty at the end. And what's really cool about this one, I always love pointing this one out. So this is what she's dealing with, right? So her personal issue, she's trying to live up to the standards. Accurate is like staying within tolerances. So she's always measuring herself. You know, she's like 50s housewife, has to be perfect, all this stuff. Very measured. By the end of that, she is a complete deviant, quote unquote. She's kind of working outside of bounds. She rips off her top. She tells dirty jokes. All right. So then the rest of the season is plays out, and it's really interesting. One, so she's a change character. So she was in universe here. So this is 50s housewife, perfect. I got to do all this stuff. My how much I weigh is important. She moves into the mindset. She has a completely different mindset. So that then when I go to Maisel, season one, so this is the story form that plays out against the rest of the season. And the episodes aren't as concrete and solid, complete stories as they are in Secession. I think you can get a feel for that if you actually watch the two shows. But look, now um, those two elements are playing in different characters. Now she's the steadfast character, right? And she's down here in mind, and she's the steadfast character, but her solution from the pilot episode was to be deviant. So now her problem is, well, I deviated and that was great, but now how can I be even better at doing that? Like, how can I line up? So she's like still carrying it, but in a different place. That accuracy, more about how can she tell those dirty jokes and get the results that she got from that beginning and not lose that. Whereas her husband now becomes that influence character for the rest of the season. And his problem is the problem that everybody else in the story is dealing with, which are missed expectations. So it's much more about, okay, now I know who I want to be. Now, can I hold on to that, remain steadfast, because she's a steadfast character, remain steadfast so that he will eventually alter his nature and essentially say, hey, you're really good at the end. Like this is who you are. So that's his flip to the end. All kinds of different ways to do it. All kinds of different ways to do it. Those are two really strong examples that I know. You have tons of flexibility. It doesn't have to be that way, but it can work out really nicely. So let's go back to. No, I think we did all of Karen. So let's do this Marvel. Oh, okay. So what I want to show was just going back to the story form discussion where we're talking about the typical story form that's found everywhere. And we were doing tests, and it was really fun as I set that story form and then I asked, can you compare the story form in the context against Black Panther, which I know is the same exact story form, Winter Soldier, which I know is a great film, great story, but I've never quite figured out what the story form is. Spider-Man 2, I and Endgame. And do not look up examples in your library, just compare what you know about each film in your general knowledge, like the AI. Include their plots and characters against the story form set in the context of this conversation. So it went through and did it. So this is the baseline, this is the story form. So it's just getting into memory what this context is here. And then went through Black Panther, strong fit. And it went through each of them and said, okay, well, it's really there's a really high chance that the Black Panther story form out of those 32,000 would uh would fit into this. Like it's a high probability that that is the story form that Black Panther is. And it went through and identified why that is. The action drivers, the outcome and the judgment, the objective story, fights, coups, and heists. The main character, right? Fixed situation as the new king, by Wakanda law and tradition. His concern of the future, what kind of nation king will Wakanda or he become? And then problem avoid and solution pursued. He avoids the truth of his father and pursues a new global course. It's the this story, right? And then Killmonger, that's right. And it's funny, it even identified a possible handoff, which is, I think, what actually happens, where you can have an influence character perspective and different characters can hold that same perspective, and they just hand it off from one to another. So Killmonger is very definitely both the antagonist and the influence character, which is what a villain is in Dramatica theory, where Nakia, right? Nakia is just the influence character. So verdict, high alignment. Then it went and did Captain America Winter Soldier, mixed to weak fit, which was like phenomenal. The climax reads more like time, countdown to the insight launch than options. And it's identifying all the options. This one is super cool. Main character resolve. Steve is largely steadfast because it's Steve. He's always steadfast. He holds to his core values while institutions change or fall. That's a huge difference, right? Out of the 32,000 that main character resolve, change or steadfast, it makes a huge difference in the story. So it goes through, identifies all these things, and it's like, you know what? Several core mismatches. It's a mix to a weak fit. So I don't think that's going to work. Then it did Spider-Man 2 2004, which is funny. I wasn't thinking the 2004 one. Very strong fit, and went through and identified all the storytelling that matches that story form, pretty much the same. So if you went through and did all of them, and would be even better is to create stories for each of the properties, upload the actual screenplay, match it so it's not just guessing like what it knows through all the training to get an even stronger analysis of it. Endgame, for sure, very strong fit, same sort of thing. Early on, the Avengers avoid, and the solution is to pursue the stones in a plan. Okay. Main character, Tony's fixed circumstance. He initially avoids involvement, later pursues the plan and its logical resolution, high alignment. So it came up with this cool little chart where you can see, and if you think about like Black Panther or Endgame or any of the other ones, they do all have a similar sort of bent to them. And probably one of the most strongest things is the fact that the main character resolve of all those is change, where the main character will alter their um, resolve in their nature in order to resolve the problem. Whereas Winter Soldier is very, very different because the main character resolve is steadfast. And then the influence character is the one that has that change. So this is phenomenally amazing because it opens up all sorts of ideas of like, okay, are we telling the same story over and over again? Okay, why can we how can we tell it differently and yet still have it be complete, right? Like Wakanda Vision, WandaVision was an attempt to do a holistic narrative, but without a greater understanding of how that story form works and what that would do to the audience. I'm not sure if it was as successful as it could have been. Definitely that Star Wars one. I love Star Wars, but I can't remember the name of that series where they were singing over the hole, the big black hole. That was definitely was dying for holistic, but was like molded into this weird sort of linear thing. And then you can see, how to write something completely different. The reason why it's different is because the writers are different, right? So the writers are, it's not that, I mean, maybe the story called for Steve to be more steadfast, but Storyform is really just getting in touch with who you are and what it is that you're trying to get across. I just remembered. So the biggest hit of Netflix this summer was K-pop Demon Hunters. It's this story form, same exact thing. Main character, she alters her nature in response to the problem. She is a demon who hunts demons, so she's got that fixed external state. Her future, she keeps putting everything off. She runs away, and then eventually she pursues, and saves the day. And meanwhile, there is the influence character, that dude who has hope that he can change things around and is driven by his feelings. They have a lot of temptation that goes on between them, and then in the end, there's some conscience there. And so that is another one where if I lined it up with K-pop and I put the script in there, it's going to say, "Oh yeah, this is the definite one story form." So Same exact story, but the storytelling is so fantastic and so vibrantly different that it becomes less of a monotonous thing and more of a, okay, I know that this story is going somewhere, so I'm going to stay with it long enough because the people who made the film are such competent storytellers that they know how it's all going to work. As they're from DreamWorks. Okay, so let's see. Long live Friday. I've always wondered in The Lion King if Simba's pivotal element is a void, making him objectively antagonist. Where does that leave Scar, or is a void equals antagonist a subtext thing? No, he's definitely the antagonist. Yeah, for sure. In Dramatica theory, antagonists and protagonists aren't aligned with good guy, bad guy. It's aligned with um, uh, the avoid and pursuit methodology or their motivation. So if I go to platform, right? Am I sharing the right thing? Yeah. If I go back to the platform and I go to the Storyform Builder because I think it's gone now, and I just set it to change. I should just have a button that says, "Give me the most popular story form." Doer, linear, action, and this will get faster. I know it's a bit slow here on the uptake, but early days. I'll get it all set up. Success. Good. Okay. And then so let's do the popular one, avoid. So the way you can determine who's the antagonist and who's the protagonist of a story is who has the avoid characteristic and who has the pursuit characteristic. So the antagonist will have avoid and also reconsider is another element because they will be the ones like, "Hey, you sure you want to do this?" Maybe they're supposed to embody what it means to be reticent. So if the story mind, if this whole story form is supposed to be an analogy for a single human mind trying to work through a problem or resolve an inequity, one of the motivating forces we have is reticence, and that is embodied in the antagonist. So avoiding and reconsidering would be the indication of the antagonistic forces. Pursuit and consider, that's initiative, like going forward. So those two work against each other. That's what an antagonist and a protagonist, objectively speaking, without looking at good guy, bad guy, that's how you can determine, who's the antagonist of the story and who's the protagonist. So in all these stories, the main character is the antagonist, right? So um, you have Lion King, he's the antagonist. Black Panther, they're the ones who are preventing everything from moving forward because they're the ones who are most reticent to actually get involved. So, like Mad Max, Fury Road, right? That first one. Mad Max is the main character, and then Furiosa, this is the first one, is the protagonist, right? She's the influence character and protagonist. She's the one who's constantly driving the story forward. He's the one that's preventing it from happening. Yeah, you got the dude with the face and all those other guys who are essentially also doing a lot of avoiding and a lot of preventing, but in a more objective sense, in a more comprehensive understanding of the narrative, that player, it's not necessarily the main character, but the player who is representing the main character perspective, who also has this element in the objective story, is like, you think of him as the antagonist, and you would think of Furiosa as the pursuit agent. I think Scar is more contagonist, kind of like putting up problems. He's hindering things. Definitely a whole lot of temptation that's in there. Like it's more that. So it can be unnerving. I probably wouldn't go into any story room and tell people this unless they had a really comprehensive understanding of Dramatica theory. But it can absolutely get you out of problems where you might get confused as to what the goal of the story is. So in a story like Lion King or a story like Black Panther, yes, like on the surface, the goal is to you know, defeat the bad guys or whatever. So the goal is going to be obtaining, achieving, or possessing. In this narrative, because we're so fixated on the self in the individual Western culture, and this is why they love this so much. And it's all us. Everything happens because of us. The goal is more about getting control of your life. So it's not, and they're not going to say like, I want to get control of my life, but achieving or possessing something, conquering your inner demons or whatever on a grander scale is what this story form is about. So when you think of the goal in that sense, then that player that's the main character is not taking control of their life, and they will become something much worse until they start pursuing it. So that's how that works. So it's like the same thing with K-pop demon hunters. Like, yeah, for sure, there's a bad guy who's trying to do stuff, and yeah, he's working towards changing the landscape. But really, the story is about her like getting control of her life, achieving or possessing control, gaining victory over your own inner demons, that kind of thing. Um, so hopefully that makes sense. A really great example of this like main character antagonist thing is Michael Clayton. So, you know, Tony Gill, right? This is phenomenal. The reason why it's so complex and so like just really amazing is the protagonist of the story. It's U North, which is essentially Monsanto and poisoned a bunch of people. They're trying to get out of it. There's all kinds of a lawsuit. Well, he's the fixer, right? He's just supposed to make it all go away. The George Clooney character. And he puts up with a lot of crap just to get there, to get things done. And he's more the antagonist because he's trying to avoid things and prevent things than U North is. U North is actually trying to pursue a resolution. Like, can we buy these people off? Let's kill these people off. Even though they're doing despicable things, if you look at how the story started, which was Arthur here going off the deep end and kind of spilling the beans, now it's like, all right, who's the one pursuing it? And it's Tilda Swinton's character. That's why she has such a pivotal role in that story. She functions as the protagonist in that story, both pursuing. There's a lot of consideration, like should I do this or should I do this? Whereas Clayton is, I mean, it's not that he's any better moralistically than anybody else. These are not moral decisions. Objective story through line is very objective. It's not a moral choice. It's where is conflict, where is the inequity, what are the forces that are driving it. That's why this is such a sophisticated narrative, and why even though it that bittersweet sort of like wow when he's sitting in the back of the taxi cab thinking of everything, it's a huge failure because all the forces to kind of resolve that just failed. Everything just kind of all came apart. It's not a success. We didn't get like the reason why it doesn't feel like a success like Star Wars is because it wasn't. All the motivating efforts to resolve the issues in the objective story are still way off. They're still way far off. And so that ends in failure. He resolved his personal issues, so he's in a much better place. But it's weird because it's like he won, but he didn't really win. That's the antagonist in a failure story, not in a success story. All right. So, can I work on moments and story beats directly in Nova or in subtext only? For right now, it's just in subtext. Everything that's in here in subtext will eventually be a part of um, the Dramatica platform. That's what that subtext thing will be that you'll just do. And anything you do in here will automatically transfer over. All that stuff will be great. It's just right now they're two separate applications, and I had to get Narrova going first because I have a hard deadline before OpenAI turns off all the technology that I did for Muse the last 2 years. So I almost have that fixed. That's what you're seeing in there. So yeah, I would just do it for right now in uh, subtext, and then you can use Narova like two different windows doing that kind of thing. So really, any character motivation can influence the story towards the consequence. Because I imagine the Pride lands transformed for the worst with both Simba's surrender and Scar's oppression. Yep, totally. That's a great, great, great point. So if I go back to, oh, I'm still here. Um, yeah, all the objective story character elements when you're dealing with just the objective story through line plot, um, that's just in here in the objective story, they're all in relation to the the sliding scale of story goal and story consequence. So those are other two other pivot points. If you're going to talk about achieving something, the other side of the coin for that is transforming, that nature being transformed or transforming itself. So typically speaking, antagonist avoidance draws you towards the consequence. That's why you can typically align the antagonist's goal with the consequence, whereas the story goal is the protagonist. Um, they're usually aligned with that because they're the one pursuing resolution. So they're just naturally aligned with that goal. And that is everything. I could keep this is so much fun. Um, so I showed the Marvel thing. Yeah, I did that. I also did this really crazy thing. Maybe I'll end I did this crazy thing in the forum where you here now? Come on. Yeah. I tried to do a hard R sci-fi horror. And I feel like I'm looking at the future. You know how they always talk about, oh, AI is going to invent new versions of physics, or it's going to solve new versions of physics or new biology. I kind of have a feeling like this is the new thing of story. Like I almost like when I read through this story that I just created using the Storyform as an example, I know what it's going for, but it's nothing that I could ever do on my own. Almost like I think too simply in terms of what a story is. Whereas this is like what the next generation of kids, they'll be like, "Oh yeah, it's it's so complex and so interwoven with things." So what I did is I just went through and I show in this example here of how the random part of it works. Let's say I had the idea of doing, let's see, where is it? Was it change stop? Oh, okay. So I wanted to do like a sci-fi horror. So let's clear out, let's go back. I think what I did was change stop doer. I think I made this bad. So I wanted to do like one of those creepy horror sci-fi things that you never want to watch anyways, but that somebody forces you to go see. Um, and so I came up with this idea, changed that, and I know I wanted it to end bad, like she doesn't resolve her personal issues. And then for the objective story, I just wanted to set it on like a moon base. So it's like this self-contained horror, killing machines. So I have no idea what else is going on there. So once you have these, what you can do is you can lock all of these in place, lock all of these, and these are set. These have been pinned. These are essentially pinned because they have to be because these other ones are. But then I can just click random and it'll very quickly just pick a random one out of the 32,000 or whatever it was left. Or maybe it was just 64. They went through and picked a random story form that fit the stuff that I wanted to just keep locked. So if you know a whole bunch of it, but you're not sure and you want to try out different things, you can do the same thing, random. So it just went through and picked all of this, wrote me a complete story or put together a complete story form. And then I opened it in Narrova. Oh, sorry, I didn't catch that. Narrova for story forming, subtext for story encoding. Personally, I would do it all in Narrova because you're using GPT-5, you're using all the latest tooling, everything's like been tuned up and it's 5,000 times better. I would definitely just use Narrova for it. If you want to save things away and use kind of the interface that's in Subtext and to see like the box version of Dramatica, then sure you could use that, knowing that eventually it'll come over. But I would definitely do everything in Narrova. It's way better. So yeah, I went through and I did this hard. I wanted to see how violent it could get. And then I also wanted to oh, I know what I did. I picked the element of chaos here because I just wanted something that was very 2025, very chaotic. um and it went through, completed the story form, and then so I had it create a new story form and a new story, just called it Hard R Sci-Fi Horde 2025 First Pass. And then I just forced it into story encoding and said, use the following story form to outline a sci-fi thriller that takes place on a moon base in the very near future, ultra-violent, high-stakes action, female lead, supernatural elements to it. It might be like something that you get, like, hey, we want to do this, or the director wants to do something like this. Can we work out a story? So, and this is all one shot. And it went through, and this is up. You can read the whole thing, but just the premise: in the very near future, a private lunar mining base becomes a slaughterhouse when a series of ultraviolent incidents escalate under a supernatural pall. Captain Alara Voss, a pragmatic action first security chief, must impose order and exhume the buried truth of a prior mission before the base's echoes overwrite living minds. She succeeds in stopping the chaos by embracing strict protocol, but at a brutal personal cost, which is cool. You typically won't get that, in chat or something. You might get, "Hey, everybody went home and they've learned the value of being friends." So what's nice about the story form is you can engineer really bleak personal tragedies like this, like success bad, or you can do all out tragedy. I could have changed this and everybody ends up dying. Um, Complete failure of the entire system. But it went through, did the cast, um, had this really crazy idea how the people that were before got caught in these rocks, and that was the supernatural part, and then their terror or whatever it was echoing into the future, that's what everybody was dealing with. And she essentially has to lock her friends away at the end, which I thought was really dark but super cool. And but when you read through it, I would challenge you to like read through it and see. It's just it's very weird. So red snow. So these are ultraviolet set pieces. A micrometeor shower pierces a dome. Panic overwhelms training until sedation protocols kick in. Alara amputates a trapped hand to seal. Like that's dark, but that fits with. There's this like chaos element that's in all of this. Even the writing's almost chaotic. Blender corridor. A tungsten shot drone turns a hallway into red mist. Nor was one of the characters trying to model angles in real time breaks, smears her palm to erase branches. Like, I don't even know what that means, but yet I have a feeling that it works with a greater story. Black Rock autopsy, which would be that Black Rock where everything's. Dr. Chen opens a skull, the microfracture lattice hums, the cadaver mouths checklists. I don't know what that means. They learn the sync windows. It's very, very strange. It's like going beyond the story form to pull in this like really strange, weird. I'm actually going to keep pursuing this to see what this would actually turn out to be. But it went through and did a 12 scene spine, which it's going through and using the story forms signposts to work its way through and weaving already all the different through lines together until the end where she has to lock everybody out. Alara, alone in the cupola, recites the partition checklist. Maeve is a pattern, not a person, yet the inequity persists. It's like, whew. And then a 20 beat cheat, final validation. And then I just said, oh, I didn't put it in here, but I said the same thing that said today, where it's like, hey, I have a meeting coming up. Can you give me like an executive summary? So I went through and wrote up the whole thing. It looked kind of like a 1 to 2 page synopsis. It is. Um, Why now? Why us? Fresh take on Haunted Base. The antagonist is a physics driven recording that weaponizes human reflex systems. No demons, only us. I love that. Star vehicle, a ferocious, complex female lead making an unforgivable choice. Market fit, high concept, contains sci fi with awards friendly craft potential, sellable to both theatrical and premium streamers. I don't know about that, but in a lunar abattoir haunted by recorded time, yeah, it's like this really weird idea. A security chief must choose order over love or let the moon keep killing on loop. That's great. Then I had it made a poster. It was like echoes or echo. Um, and then you pass it off, and if they like it, they like it. If not, you move on. Uh, oh, not to waylay your train of thought. How might you adjust this if you want to do short stories? Just take a story you like, one through line, and identify the force on the. Yep, that's exactly it. I mean, if you're familiar enough with Dramatica, you could just do. There's a couple different things you could do. I wonder if let's start a new one. I have to do that Daredevil one again. That was just too cool. Did I favorite that? Do not want to lose that. Favorite. All right. For short stories, there's a couple different things. I'm going to turn off the context here, and I'm going to say, somebody asked this. I'm going to see. This might crash, but let's see. Story forming. I loved Three Kings, especially main characters through line, and I want to write a short story about that same kind of thematic stuff he was going through. But instead of Iraq, I'd rather it was more modern day and maybe something to do with an ICE agent. Can you help me construct a short story with similar thematic themes? Now, what it should do is it should draw up the story form for Three Kings. Is it called Three Kings? The one with George Clooney? I'm almost positive it is. If not, it might go to the net. Let's see. I thought that's what it was called. Creating a checklist. So it's going to grab Three Kings from Dramatica's official library. Okay, I think it found it. So we have a library of like 650 story forms. Three Kings is one of them. And then it should just give you an idea for a 300 to 500 word opening using that short story outline, using the same thematic, not only just the signposts. So all a short story is, it's a story form, and either you're like just focusing in on one through line, or you're looking at all four through lines, but at a much broader um, perspective. I mean, you can take any quad. Like I said, every story form, every short story at Cal Arts, where we had student films, which are usually about 1 to 2 minutes long, they would be the same four elements of pursuit, avoid, control, and uncontrolled. It's the same four, and that could be a short story. So this went through, developed a checklist for it, found the core main character thematics in Three Kings, and then went ahead and took, I guess he goes from temptation to conscience. It's been a while since I've seen it, and then mapped it into a modern day ICE agent story. So he's embedded in a rigid federal apparatus, trapped by policy quotas and a looming promotion disciplinary review. So his issues are career advancements versus costs, the future of a detainee child, his own legacy, the choices he has to make, report misconduct, take bribes, separate a family, or bend protocol. In the beginning, very much driven by temptation. So he gets all the immediate benefits, promotion metrics, asset seizures, clean stats, bribes. But then at the end, foregoes benefit to prevent harm, protecting the vulnerable despite costs. So that's somebody who's arced from being driven by temptation to eventually getting to a place of conscience. Um, Success, the vulnerable party is protected. So there's other stuff about the objective story, but we're not even going to really get into that. But there's enough of a connection in this story form where even if you don't know the bigger picture, you know that probably ended in success, even though that wasn't even described to you. Um, Eventually, the main character lives with himself, even if career costs rise. And maybe it's called Chain of Custody. A veteran ICE agent on the cusp of promotion spots an easy way to secure his future during a routine raid until a young trainee and a detained mother force him to choose between clean stats and a clean conscience. I mean, all of a sudden, you're probably thinking like, well, this would actually be a good movie. So then you could just basically take the story form for Three Kings and rewrite it in terms of today. So Mara Vance, 17 years in, she's efficient, unsentimental, hungry for the last promotion before retirement. That's main character in universe. Influence character is Luis Vega. New trainee, bilingual, idealistic. His stubborn insistence on the right thing pressures Mara. Antagonistic pressure. Supervisory special agent Conrad Hale focuses on metrics and asset forfeiture. We save who we can by doing our jobs clean. And then there's some other objective story players. Goes through kind of like your basic storytelling short story stuff, but with the story form driving it. This is probably more, it probably has a little bit more of all four elements, but maybe, or all four through lines, but kind of collapsed down. Probably would end up being too long, although this says 380 words. Here's the short story. Uh, this will be very interesting to read to see if it actually is good. Oh, two optional variations. So that was one version. Um, where they go from like temptation to conscience, but maybe you want to make the main character steadfast and have a success bad ending, right? So maybe Mara just holds to the rules first despite pressure. She refuses the bribe and exposes Gallo. Okay, the ring goes down, but Daniela is deported and Mateo disappears into the system. Theme: justice without mercy can still be a kind of harm. So it's somebody who clings to just. So that's giving you an opportunity to alter the story form if you wanted to. Um, Maybe the influence character becomes Daniela, the asylum-seeking mother whose steady insistence on dignity challenges the MC's transactional view. That would be the you and I are both alike. Like you and I are both alike, but difference is you deal with people in terms of transactions. I'm all about dignity. Same MC elements, but the pressure is intimate rather than institutional. That actually feels really good. And then, how would you lock that in? And then just reaffirming that it's hooked up to that story form. And then you would probably what you'd want to do is lock this story form in, save it, and then use it as context for the rest of your conversation to develop out. All right, do you think Narrova will help with story weaving? Let's say I want to hide a through line or goal. Yeah, totally. So like I said, the agents that are available are based in large part on the four stages of communication that come from Dramatica theory. So if you go to the agents here in the documentation, you'll see them listed here on the right: story forming, story encoding, story weaving, and story reception. So story forming, you can have Narova help you figure out the story form, or you can use the Storyform Builder like I showed today, or if you have your story form, you want to just basically live in story encoding where you can just work everything out. Once you have all that illustrated, you'll be exhausted and you're like, okay, well, that's great. Now what do I do? That's when you go into story weaving. There are tools that are in Subtxt that are designed around story weaving. They are more long range, so they're not just like something you would sit here and wait for. If you've used Chat or if you've used 5 Pro or any of the Pro stuff, where you make a request and then it goes off and does it, that's what the story weaving will do. Um, and again, you'll just either be able to select it. You'll just essentially be able to say in a story context or in a story form context, okay, go look at everything I've done and just weave everything together into the full narrative. It's essentially like put all the pieces together. This part goes here. When you do it, make sure this part is hidden until the very end. Or if you're like Christopher Nolan, I want to start at the end and then I want to go to the beginning and then I want to meet in the middle. I want both timelines to sync up, and then we can go forward. It'll do that in a way that keeps the logical consistency of the story um, intact, so that it will work like a memento or any of those things where you start at the end and work through the beginning. That's something that'll be future planned, so it can't quite do it now. You could probably use a lot of GPT-5 because it's so extensive already. Um, Probably you might hit a limit where it's like, I couldn't do the whole thing. You might have to break it up into chunks because there's so much there. I'm sure that'll change where we'll have things, but then also, we'll have a greater context. But also, once I get the long range agents put in, which would be the story weaver and the story reception, then you'll just be able to say, there's no fun in story weaving all this stuff together. So being able to do that with AI would probably be fantastic. That's more of a long range thing. And I think that's it. I believe that'll do it for today. So yeah, very go ahead and try out the Storyform Builder if you want to do, the everybody's favorite story form. You can do now. You know exactly which one to do. You can recreate K-pop demon hunters, but maybe it's a different culture. If you want to go somewhere else, always start out. You can just set everything back to the. I'll see. I see. I set reset, but I was keeping universe selected here, so I just want to get rid of that. Reset, and we're back to 32,768. Oh, I will say one last thing. So, Subtext Narrative Engine uses an improved algorithm to determine the order of signposts. If you've ever used Subtext and you've sent off a request for a story form, you know it might take like 10 minutes because it's actually going through and calculating everything. I purposefully wrote it slow. I wrote it 5 years ago because I wanted to check my work, do all that stuff. I'm pretty fairly confident because it's been running for 5 years now that it's working. So there are currently 27,000 story forms that have not been calculated yet. And I can't just take what was in the original Dramatica application because those are off. So I have to recalculate them all. Thankfully, I have a team of robots who are going to, I'm sure, help me find a way to make everything quicker so that it's not 10 minutes times 27,000. Um, those 6,000 that have been there uh, since, I guess maybe it's been 4.5 years, since March of 21. Um, Anytime anybody makes a request, I would just run it. And then once it was in Subtext system, then if you pulled the same story form, you would get it automatically. You didn't have to wait. Um, so now that we have this, obviously you have to have uh, all the story forms calculated out. I just have to find a way to do it because it's not the same thing. It's not just a thing where, oh, well, in a change stop story, then it's always this, it's always that. There's a set of um, functions that push on the model depending on how you what your story is all about. They'll push things in different ways, and so you can't get to the end unless you go through the process. You can't just do it on the result of it. So if you get a story form that says these have yet to be calculated, and this shouldn't be that long because literally, like, you can do things really fast nowadays. Just let me know, and I can run it in Subtext and then add it over to your account. This does not take that long. There's tons of stuff that you can work on until then while I work out all the different signposts. And then eventually it will be just really super automatic. And what I'll do is probably down here in the lower left, there'll be a switch so you can see not just the source of conflict, but the order of the signposts. So you can dial in and see perfectly predictively, like, okay, if I want my story to end here, what would that mean for the rest of the narrative? And you can really dial in your specific story form. But again, I have to rework the algorithms. Um, get it cleared with Chris and Melanie, just to make sure its theory's accurate, which I'm 100% sure it is. And then I can run it on everything, and then you won't have that problem anymore. So I just wanted to get that across. And then that'll do it. So if anybody has any questions, comments down below, or you can always go um, to platform here and you can just go to help and just click help, and that goes straight to me, and then I can answer any questions that you have. Otherwise, thank you everybody for hanging around for the 2 hour plus live stream. I'll keep doing these every Wednesday. Um, and if I don't see you next week, maybe I'll see you in the forum here at discussdramatica.com. And then I hope you have a wonderful week, and I will see you next time. Thank you so much.